I still remember the exact shade of her lipstick that day, crimson, like the blood that would later metaphorically spill from my dreams. Vivian Moore sat across from me, her manicured fingers drumming against my resume, each tap feeling like a nail in my professional coffin. I'd been at Reynolds Marketing for just over a year, eager and ambitious, when I'd finally mustered the courage to ask about the junior creative director position. Creative director? The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite reaching a smile. Emma, let's be realistic about your capabilities. The way she paused before capabilities made my stomach clench. I'd stayed late every night that week preparing my portfolio, my ideas, my vision for the company. I'd practiced this conversation in the mirror, anticipated her questions, rehearsed my responses until they flowed naturally. But I hadn't prepared for dismissal clothed as concern. I've been taking night classes in digital marketing strategy, I offered, leaning forward slightly. And the campaign I led for Horizon Beverages increased their engagement by 38%. Vivian sighed, the sound theatrical enough to belong on a stage. She closed my portfolio without looking at the second page, the page with my proudest achievements. Emma, I'm trying to do you a favor here. Her voice took on that syrupy quality reserved for children and people she deemed intellectually inferior. Some people are meant to be worker bees. There's no shame in that. The creative director track requires a certain spark that I'm just not seeing in you. My cheeks burned. I've consistently exceeded my targets. My client satisfaction scores, numbers, she interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. Anyone can generate numbers. Leadership requires vision, charisma, that special something. My advice? She leaned forward, her expensive perfume invading my space. Give up on this particular dream. Focus on being the best account coordinator you can be. Some of us are meant to soar, others to support those who do. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, the office too small. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues pretending not to listen from their nearby desks. 7 years of education, thousands in student loans, countless nights sacrificing sleep for work, all reduced to worker bee status by a woman whose main talent seemed to be making others feel small. I understand, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Thank you for your time. I gathered my portfolio, careful to keep my hands from shaking. As I stood, Vivian was already checking her phone, my career aspirations forgotten before I'd even left her presence. Close the door on your way out, she said without looking up. I did, with a soft click that belied the storm raging inside me. In the bathroom, I locked myself in a stall and pressed my forehead against the cool metal door, willing the tears not to fall. Not here, not now. I refused to give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd broken something in me. That night, I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by job listings, a half-empty bottle of wine beside me. My roommate Rachel found me there, red-eyed and quiet. Vivian shot me down, I said before she could ask. Apparently, I lack the special something required for advancement. Rachel's expression darkened. She'd heard enough stories about Vivian over the past year to form her own opinions. That witch, she muttered, sitting beside me. What are you going to do? I took another sip of wine, feeling it burn down my throat. I don't know yet. But even as I said it, something was crystallizing inside me, a resolve hardening like amber around an insect. Vivian Moore had made a critical error. She'd assumed my silence meant acceptance, that I would fold my dreams into a neat little package and tuck them away at her command. She was wrong. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I analyzed my options with the kind of clarity that sometimes only comes from having nothing left to lose. By morning, I had a plan. Not for revenge, not yet. First came survival, then growth, and only then would I think about setting things right. I gave my notice the following week. Vivian barely looked up from her desk when I handed in my resignation letter. Boutique agency? She smirked after glancing at the letterhead of my offer. Well, perhaps that's more your speed. Smaller pond and all that. Something like that, I replied, my voice pleasant and empty. Good luck, Emma, she said, already turning back to her computer. Do stay in touch. I wouldn't, of course. Not until I had something worth saying. The boutique agency, Catalyst Creative, was indeed smaller, but what Vivian didn't know, or care to find out, was that they were growing rapidly, specializing in the emerging digital immersion market that larger, more traditional agencies like Reynolds were too slow to fully embrace. I'd taken a lateral move in title, but with a clear path for advancement that I'd negotiated during my interviews. We need people who can grow with us. Marcus, the founder, had said during my final interview, people who aren't afraid to push boundaries. "That's exactly who I am," I'd responded, thinking of Vivian's dismissive wave. Someone who doesn't accept artificial limitations. The first 3 months at Catalyst were brutal. I worked 18-hour days, absorbing everything I could about the industry, the clients, the strategies that worked, and those that failed. I volunteered for the difficult accounts, the ones other team members avoided. I studied at night, built my network during lunch breaks, and pitched ideas even when they weren't solicited. Some were rejected. Many were. But unlike Vivian, Marcus and his team didn't mistake persistence for lack of talent. They saw it as evidence of passion. 6 months in, I landed the agency's biggest client to date, a tech startup with deep pockets and ambitious goals. 9 months in, I was promoted to senior strategist. At the 1-year mark, I was leading a team of 5. I barely noticed when the anger that had fueled my initial departure began to transform into something else, a cold, steady determination that was less about proving Vivian wrong and more about proving myself right. I wasn't working for revenge anymore, I was working for excellence. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't occasionally imagine the look on Vivian's face if she could see me now. 2 years after leaving Reynolds, Catalyst had tripled in size. I was now Creative Strategy Director, with 20 people under my guidance and a reputation in the industry for innovative campaigns that delivered measurable results. My name was mentioned in trade publications. I was invited to speak at conferences. The same skills Vivian had dismissed were now being celebrated and sought after. It was after one such conference that I ran into Dylan, my former colleague from Reynolds. "Emma Watson?" he called across the hotel bar, his face lighting up with recognition. "I thought that was you." We embraced, the awkwardness of our different positions at Reynolds now erased by time and distance. "You're making waves," he said, gesturing to the conference badge still hanging around my neck. "That presentation on immersive storytelling was brilliant." "Thanks." I smiled, genuinely pleased to see him. "How are things at Reynolds?" Dylan's expression shifted subtly. "Changing, actually. The old guard is struggling to keep up with agencies like yours. There's talk of a major restructuring." My pulse quickened slightly. "Oh, anyone I know affected?" "Too soon to tell." He shrugged, signaling the bartender. "But word is they're looking to acquire fresh talent and new perspectives. Vivian's been especially stressed. Seems her methods aren't delivering the results they used to." I kept my expression neutral, though something dark and satisfied unfurled in my chest. The industry moves quickly. Adapt or be left behind. Speaking of adapting, Dylan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Any chances for a position at Catalyst? I've been following your work. It's where the future is." I handed him my card, a sleek matte black with embossed silver lettering. "Send me your portfolio. We're always looking for talent that others might have overlooked." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. 3 months after that chance meeting, Marcus called me into his office. The Catalyst headquarters had expanded to occupy 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, with my office situated in the corner with views of the river. I'd earned that view, paid for it in late nights and brilliant ideas and the occasional failure that I'd learned from quickly. "Close the door," Marcus said, unusually serious. "We need to talk." For a fraction of a second, old insecurities flared. Was I about to be demoted? Let go? Had I made a critical error I wasn't aware of? "We've been approached for acquisition," Marcus said without preamble. I blinked, processing. By whom? Reynolds Marketing. The name hit me like a physical blow. Of all the agencies that might want to absorb Catalyst's innovative approach and client list, it had to be them, had to be her. "They're struggling," Marcus continued, unaware of my internal turmoil. "Traditional methods aren't cutting it anymore. They need what we've built, and they're willing to pay handsomely for it. And you're considering it?" I kept my voice level, professional. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I'm considering the terms. One of which would be that our leadership team, you included, would take on significant roles in the merged company. They need our expertise, our vision. Who's spearheading this from their side?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Board of directors, primarily, but their creative director is the one who identified us as a target, Vivian Moore." Hearing her name spoken aloud in this context sent a strange chill through me. 3 years had passed since she'd told me to give up on my dreams. 3 years of work and growth and success that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with what she'd failed to see in me. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, studying my expression. What was I thinking? That life had a sense of irony too perfect to be coincidental? That the universe had handed me the opportunity for the most satisfying revenge possible? Or perhaps that success truly was the best revenge, and I'd already won without this bizarre twist of fate? "I'm thinking," I said carefully, "that we should hear their offer." The meeting was set for the following week at a neutral location, an upscale restaurant with a private dining room. Marcus had asked me to lead our team's presentation on Catalyst's value proposition and future growth strategy. I would be, essentially, selling our company's vision to the very people who once thought I had none. I prepared meticulously, as was now my habit. Every slide was perfect, every number verified, every projection based on solid data and reasonable assumptions. I wasn't going to give Vivian, or anyone from Reynolds, a single reason to doubt me this time. The night before the meeting, I stood in front of my closet, deliberating longer than usual. This wasn't vanity, it was armor selection. I finally chose a tailored charcoal suit with a subtle silver pinstripe, crisp white shirt, and a single piece of statement jewelry, a silver pendant shaped like a phoenix that Rachel had given me after my first major success at Catalyst. "For rising from the ashes," she'd said with a grin. How appropriate it seemed now. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, as did Marcus and our CFO, Diane. We were shown to the private room where we reviewed our strategy one final time. "Remember," Marcus said, "we're not desperate for this deal. We're in a position of strength." I nodded, checking my presentation one last time on my tablet. My hands were steady, my breathing controlled. I had prepared for this moment without even knowing it was coming. At exactly 1 p.m., the door opened. 3 men in suits entered first, Reynolds executives I didn't recognize. Behind them came an older man I identified as their CEO from my research. And then finally Vivian. She looked older than I remembered, or perhaps just more tired. Her hair was still perfectly styled, her clothes still expensively tailored, but there was a tightness around her eyes that spoke of pressure and worry. She scanned the room quickly, her gaze passing over me without recognition, before returning with a slight widening of her eyes. "Emma?" The surprise in her voice was gratifying. "Emma Watson from accounts?" "Emma Watson, Creative Strategy Director," Marcus corrected smoothly, though I hadn't briefed him on our history. "She'll be walking us through Catalyst's market position and growth strategy today." Vivian recovered quickly, professional mask sliding back into place. "Of course. Lovely to see you again, Emma. Quite the career trajectory. I found my spark," I replied with a pleasant smile, enjoying the slight flush that rose to her cheeks as she recognized her own words thrown back at her. The meeting proceeded with formal introductions and preliminary discussions of what an acquisition might look like. I noticed Vivian watching me throughout, her expression unreadable. When it was my turn to present, I stood with a confidence that came from knowing exactly how good I was at what I did. For 45 minutes, I outlined Catalyst's journey, our unique approach to digital marketing, our impressive client roster, and our plans for continued expansion. I fielded questions with ease, backed up assertions with data, and painted a picture of a company that wasn't desperate to be acquired, but would consider the right partnership if it aligned with our vision. When I concluded, there was a moment of silence before Reynolds' CEO spoke up. "Impressive work, Ms. Watson. Very impressive indeed." I inclined my head slightly in acknowledgement. "Thank you. We're proud of what we've built." "As you should be," he agreed, then turned to Marcus. "I think we have a lot to discuss in terms of specifics. Perhaps our teams could give us the room for a moment?" Marcus nodded, and everyone except the 2 CEOs filed out. In the hallway, Reynolds' executives clustered together in hushed conversation, while Diane stepped away to take a call. This left Vivian and me standing awkwardly apart from the others. She approached me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've done well for yourself, Emma. I must say I'm surprised." "Are you really?" I kept my voice light. "I'm not." "No, I suppose you wouldn't be." She glanced toward her colleagues, then back to me. "I hope there are no hard feelings about our last conversation at Reynolds. I was only trying to be realistic about the opportunities available at that time." The non-apology apology. Classic Vivian. "Actually," I said, meeting her gaze directly, "I should thank you. If you hadn't told me to give up on my dreams, I might never have left to pursue them properly." Her smile faltered slightly. "Well, it seems things have worked out for the best, then." "They have," I agreed. "Though I do wonder how things might change if this acquisition goes through. Organizational structures can be so fluid during transitions." The implication hung in the air between us. If Catalyst and Reynolds merged, and if our leadership team took prominent roles as Marcus had suggested, the hierarchy would inevitably shift. Vivian was smart enough to see where that might leave her. "I've been with Reynolds for 15 years, she said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "My position is quite secure." I simply smiled. "Things change quickly in this industry. As you said yourself once, some are meant to soar, others to support." Before she could respond, the door opened and the CEOs emerged, both looking satisfied. "We'd like to continue these discussions," Reynolds' CEO announced. "I think there's potential for a mutually beneficial arrangement here." Marcus caught my eye and gave a subtle nod of approval. This was good news for Catalyst, good news for all of us who had built it from the ground up. That it might also lead to a dramatic reversal of fortune between Vivian and myself was simply a poetic footnote to a sound business decision. As we gathered our things to leave, Vivian approached me one last time. "This isn't personal, Emma," she said quietly. "It's just business." I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the humiliation I'd felt in her office 3 years ago, the tears in the bathroom stall, the night on my apartment floor surrounded by job listings. "Of course it is," I replied finally. "It's always both." The following weeks were a blur of meetings, due diligence, and negotiations. I was deeply involved in the process, working closely with Marcus to ensure that Catalyst's culture and approach wouldn't be swallowed by Reynolds' more traditional methods. In truth, that was unlikely. Reynolds was acquiring us precisely because their methods were failing, but corporate acquisitions were delicate things, and I wasn't taking any chances. Throughout it all, I maintained a strictly professional demeanor. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about securing the best possible outcome for the company I'd helped build and the team I'd led. If that outcome happened to include a restructuring that elevated my position above Vivian's, well, that was simply good business sense. The deal was finalized on a Tuesday. By Friday, the new organizational chart was announced. Reynolds Catalyst would operate as a single entity with integrated departments. Marcus would take a position on the board. I would become Executive Creative Director, overseeing all creative operations across the merged company. And Vivian? She would report directly to me as a Senior Creative Manager, a title crafted to sound like a promotion, while actually representing a significant step down in authority. The email went out company-wide at 3 p.m. By 3:05, my phone buzzed with a meeting request from Vivian for 4:30 that same day. I accepted with a single tap, then returned to reviewing the transition plans for my department. At precisely 4:30, my new assistant, a perk of the executive position, showed Vivian into my office. My new office, with its expansive views and sleek furnishings, a tangible symbol of how far I'd come since our last one-on-one meeting. "Emma," she said, her smile tight, "congratulations on your new role." "Thank you, Vivian," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Please have a seat." She did, crossing her legs and straightening her spine in a posture I recognized as defensive pride. "I wanted to discuss the restructuring directly with you. There seems to be some confusion about reporting lines." "No confusion?" I said calmly. "The organizational chart was quite clear. You'll be reporting to me moving forward. I'll be overseeing all creative operations across both legacy companies. After 15 years at Reynolds," she began, her voice rising slightly. "Experience is valuable," I interrupted smoothly, "but so is innovation and adaptability. The board feels this structure best positions us for future growth." She stared at me, and I could see the exact moment when she realized that this wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was her new reality. "I see," she said finally. "And I suppose you're enjoying this turn of events given our history." I leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact. "Our history is precisely why I know exactly what you're capable of, Vivian. You're detail-oriented, thorough, and you understand the traditional market well. Those skills will be valuable in your new role, supporting the broader creative vision." The echo of her words from years ago hung between us. Worker bee, support those who soar. "And if I find this arrangement unsatisfactory?" she asked, her implication clear. "Then you have options, of course," I replied. "The market for experienced creative managers is quite robust. I'd be happy to provide a reference if you decide to explore opportunities elsewhere." Vivian's fingers tightened on her purse. "That won't be necessary. I'm committed to making this transition successful." "Excellent," I smiled, genuine in my professional satisfaction, if not entirely innocent of personal vindication. "I'm looking forward to working together. I have some exciting new directions planned that I think will challenge all of us to grow." The meeting ended shortly after, with Vivian maintaining her composure until the very last moment. As she reached the door, however, she paused and turned back to me. "You planned this," she said, not a question but an accusation. "From the moment you heard about the acquisition?" I considered her for a moment. This woman who had once held so much power over my professional future, who had dismissed my potential with a casual wave of her hand. Now she stood in my office, awaiting my response, our positions entirely reversed. "No, Vivian," I said finally. "I didn't plan this. I simply became exactly who I always knew I could be, despite your advice to the contrary. The rest is just poetic justice." She left without another word, the door closing softly behind her. Alone in my office, I turned to look out at the city skyline, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the urban landscape. I thought about the path that had led me here, the humiliation, the determination, the countless hours of work, the risks taken and rewards earned. I had not set out for revenge. I had set out to prove myself right. That the revenge came anyway felt less like triumph and more like validation, a confirmation that believing in myself had always been the correct choice. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Heard the news. Karma's a bitch named Emma Watson. Drinks tonight to celebrate?" I smiled, typing back, "Not celebrating that. Celebrating this." I attached a photo of my new office nameplate, Emma Watson, Executive Creative Director, because that was the truth. This wasn't about Vivian anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. This was about the journey I'd taken, the skills I'd developed, the leader I'd become. Vivian had been wrong about me, but proving her wrong had stopped being my motivation years ago. Still, as I gathered my things to leave that evening, I couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. Not because I'd become her boss, though there was undeniably a certain symmetry to that outcome, but because I'd proven that dreams didn't need to be abandoned simply because one person couldn't see their value. Sometimes they just needed to be pursued elsewhere, with people who recognized potential when they saw it. The first few weeks of the merger were chaotic, as such transitions always are. I worked 14-hour days, meeting with team members from both companies, reassuring nervous employees, and beginning to implement the integrated strategy I'd developed. Vivian maintained a professional demeanor in our interactions, though I could sense her resentment simmering beneath the surface. She completed assigned tasks efficiently, but offered little in the way of initiative or enthusiasm. I hadn't expected otherwise. It was during our first major client presentation as a merged entity that things came to a head. We were pitching to retain a significant account, one that had originally been with Reynolds but had been expressing dissatisfaction for months. The client, a luxury automotive brand, had been making noise about exploring other agencies with more innovative digital approaches. I had assembled a team that represented the best of both companies, including Vivian for her historical knowledge of the account. The presentation had been collaborative in development, with each team member contributing to their area of expertise. The morning of the presentation, we gathered in the conference room for a final review. Everything was in order until we reached Vivian's section on consumer engagement strategy. "This approach is too conservative," I said, reviewing her slides. "They're specifically looking for innovation in digital engagement. This is what has worked with them historically," Vivian countered. "I've managed this account for 7 years. They value tradition and proven methods. What they value is results," I corrected. "And they haven't been seeing them with the traditional approach. That's why they're considering other agencies." I could see several team members shifting uncomfortably, sensing the tension between us. "Perhaps we could present both approaches?" suggested one of the Reynolds account managers diplomatically. "Show them we understand their history but also have fresh ideas." "No," I said firmly. "We present a unified strategy. Vivian, I need you to revise this section before the presentation at 2. Focus on the immersive experience concepts we discussed last week, integrated with their brand heritage." Vivian's face flushed slightly. "That's not what this client wants. It's what they need," I replied, standing to indicate the meeting was over. "And it's the direction we're taking." 2 o'clock, revised and ready. The team dispersed, but Vivian remained seated. Once we were alone, she looked up at me with cold eyes. "You're making a mistake," she said. "One that will cost us this account." I met her gaze steadily. "If I am, then it's my mistake to make? That's what being executive creative director means." "This isn't about the client," she accused. "This is about overriding me because you can." I sighed, suddenly tired of the unspoken tension between us. Vivian, contrary to what you might believe, not everything is about our personal history. This is about doing what's best for the agency and the client. Your approach hasn't been working, that's why they're considering leaving. And you think your untested concepts will save the day? Your digital gimmicks and flashy presentations? What I think, I said carefully, is that continuing to do the same thing while expecting different results is the definition of insanity. We need to evolve. If you can't be part of that evolution, perhaps you should reconsider your options here. She stood abruptly. I'll have the revisions to you by 1:30. The presentation went forward as planned. My strategy team delivered a cohesive vision that honored the client's heritage while offering bold new directions for their digital presence. Vivian presented her section professionally, though without the enthusiasm that marked the rest of the presentation. To my relief, and I suspected Vivian's chagrin, the client was impressed. They committed to another year with us, with an increased budget specifically for the innovative approaches I'd championed. As we were packing up after the clients left, Vivian approached me. "Congratulations," she said, her tone neutral. "It seems your approach resonated with them." "It did?" I agreed. "Your presentation of the engagement strategy was well done. Thank you for making those adjustments." She nodded stiffly. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about my options." I paused in gathering my materials. "And I've been with Reynolds for 15 years, she said. "I've built my career there, my reputation. No one is questioning your contributions, Vivian. Aren't they?" Her eyes met mine directly. "You are. Every time you override my recommendations or dismiss my concerns." I considered her words carefully. There was truth in them, though not perhaps in the way she meant. I wasn't dismissing her input because of our history. I was pushing for change because it was necessary. But I couldn't deny that there was a certain satisfaction in being the one with the authority to do so now. "The industry is changing," I said finally. "We can either change with it or be left behind. I'm choosing the former. And if I can't or won't change in the ways you deem necessary, then yes, you should consider your options," I replied honestly. "I don't want unwilling team members, Vivian. I want people who are excited about where we're going, not resentful of leaving behind where we've been." She nodded slowly. "I'll give it some thought." The following Monday, Vivian requested another meeting. She arrived precisely on time, dressed impeccably as always, a folder tucked under her arm. "I've made a decision," she said without preamble once my assistant had closed the door behind her. "I'm listening," I replied, setting aside the report I'd been reviewing. "I've received an offer from Meridian Group," she said, naming one of the more traditional agencies in the city. "Senior Creative Director position. I'll be giving my notice today." I wasn't entirely surprised. Vivian was talented in her way, with deep industry connections. That she'd found a position better suited to her approach made sense. "I see," I said. "When would you be looking to transition?" 2 weeks, standard notice." She placed the folder on my desk. "This contains all my current projects, contact information for my clients, and transition notes for whoever takes over my accounts." I opened the folder, scanning the meticulous notes inside. Even in departure, Vivian was thorough and professional. I had to respect that, whatever our personal history. "Thank you for this," I said, closing the folder. "And congratulations on your new position. Meridian will benefit from your experience." She seemed momentarily thrown by my genuine tone. "Thank you. I think it's a better fit for my approach." "I agree," I said simply. Vivian hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "Did you want this to happen? Did you deliberately make my position untenable?" I considered her question carefully, wanting to be honest, with her and with myself. "No," I said finally. "I wanted the merged company to succeed. I pushed for changes I believe are necessary for that success. That those changes made you uncomfortable enough to leave is an outcome I anticipated as possible, but it wasn't my goal." "But you're not sorry to see me go," she observed. "No," I admitted. "I'm not. We have fundamentally different visions of where this industry is heading. Working together would have continued to be challenging." She nodded, a faint, rueful smile crossing her face. "When you first left Reynolds, I told everyone you weren't cut out for the creative director track. That you'd be back within 6 months, begging for your old job." I raised an eyebrow. "And now? Now I'm the one leaving," she said with a small shrug. "Life has a strange way of circling back, doesn't it?" "It does," I agreed, though I don't think either of us could have predicted this particular circle. We looked at each other for a long moment, the weight of our shared history hovering between us. 3 years ago, she had dismissed my potential with casual cruelty. Today, she was leaving the company where I now held the position she'd once told me I could never achieve. "For what it's worth," she said finally, "I was wrong about you." The admission surprised me, coming from a woman who had never struck me as one to acknowledge mistakes. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "I knew it then, but it's nice to hear it now." Vivian nodded once more, then stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "I don't suppose you'd be willing to serve as a reference, given our history?" I considered the request. It would be easy, and perhaps satisfying in a petty way, to refuse. To let her feel a fraction of the uncertainty I'd felt when leaving Reynolds on the strength of my own determination, rather than with the blessing of my superior. But I wasn't Vivian, and I didn't need that kind of satisfaction anymore. "I would be happy to," I said. "Despite our differences in approach, your work ethic and attention to detail are undeniable. Those are qualities any agency would value." Relief flickered across her face. "I appreciate that, more than you might expect." After she left, I sat quietly in my office, reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me here. When Vivian had told me to give up on my dreams 3 years ago, I couldn't have imagined that I would one day be the one accepting her resignation, that I would be the one with the power to help or hinder her next career move. There was closure in this moment, a sense of a chapter ending, not because I had won some contest between us, but because I had proven, to myself more than anyone, that believing in my abilities had been the right choice all along. I picked up my phone and texted Rachel, "Vivian's leaving. Taking a position at Meridian." Her response came quickly, "OMG, the circle is complete." "Karma really is your bitch?" I smiled but shook my head slightly. This wasn't about karma or revenge. It was simpler than that. It was about staying true to my vision even when others couldn't see it. About persevering when the easier path would have been to accept Vivian's limited view of my potential. 2 weeks later, we held a standard farewell gathering for Vivian, as we did for any departing employee. I made appropriate remarks about her contributions and wished her well in her new position. She thanked the team and made gracious comments about the future of Reynolds Catalyst. As people dispersed back to their desks, Vivian approached me one last time. "I suppose this is it," she said. "End of an era, beginning of a new one," I replied. "For both of us." She nodded, then offered her hand. "Good luck, Emma, though I doubt you'll need it." I shook her hand firmly. "The same to you, Vivian." As I watched her walk away for the final time, I felt not triumph, but a quiet sense of completion. The wound she had inflicted years ago, telling me to give up on my dreams, had finally healed completely. Not because I had become her boss, not because she was now leaving the company, but because I had proven to myself that my dreams had been worth fighting for all along. That night, I stayed late in my office, finalizing plans for a company-wide creative retreat to fully integrate the two teams. As I looked out at the city lights, I thought about the many possible futures that stretched before me now. The clients we could win, the campaigns we could create, the innovations we could pioneer. None of those possibilities had anything to do with Vivian Moore or the limitations she had once tried to place on me. They were about what I could build, create, and achieve with the talent and determination that had always been inside me, waiting for the right opportunity to flourish. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Board loved the Q3 projections. You're making this merger work better than anyone expected. Dinner tomorrow to discuss international expansion?" I smiled as I typed my response. "Absolutely. I have some ideas I think you'll like." Because that was the truth of it all. Beyond the personal satisfaction of proving Vivian wrong, beyond the symmetry of our reversed positions, was the simple fact that I was good at what I did, that I had earned this role through talent and hard work, that I belonged here. She had told me to give up on my dreams. Instead, I had pursued them relentlessly until they became my reality. Now she worked somewhere else entirely, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. Sometimes life really did come full circle, and sometimes that circle was perfect. 6 months passed in a blur of client pitches, campaign launches, and integration challenges. Without Vivian's resistant presence, I had reshaped the creative department into something that better reflected my vision, more collaborative, more innovative, more willing to take calculated risks. Most of the Reynolds team had adapted well, grateful for the fresh energy and approach that had already begun to win back wavering clients and attract new ones. I'd been so focused on making the merger succeed that I barely registered the anniversary of Vivian's departure until Marcus mentioned it during our weekly leadership meeting. Half a year since the old guard moved on, he remarked as we wrapped up. Revenue up 18% since then? I'd say your leadership transition has been a resounding success, Emma. The other executives nodded in agreement, and I felt a flush of pride. Not the vindictive satisfaction I might have expected to feel when thinking about Vivian, but genuine professional pride in what we had accomplished. Thank you, I said simply. It's been a team effort. Later that evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, my assistant Claire knocked on my doorframe. "Package for you," she said, placing a small box on my desk. "Courier just dropped it off." I frowned slightly. "After-hours delivery?" Apparently it was marked urgent. She shrugged. "Need anything else before I head out?" "No thanks. Have a good night." After she left, I examined the package. It was a small box wrapped in elegant black paper with a silver ribbon, professional packaging from an upscale boutique. The attached card bore only my name, no sender indicated. Inside was a sleek black leather notebook with my initials embossed in silver on the cover. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on heavy cream stationery. "Emma, I hear Reynolds Catalyst has become the agency to watch under your leadership. Meridian just lost the Archer account to you. Well played. Perhaps you truly did have that special something. After all, congratulations on your continued success. V." I stared at the note for a long moment, unsure how to feel. Was this a peace offering? A backhanded compliment? Genuine acknowledgement? The Archer account had indeed been a significant win for us, a luxury brand formerly with Meridian that had approached us specifically because of our innovative digital campaigns. Setting the notebook aside, I pulled up industry news on my tablet. I hadn't been monitoring Meridian's business closely, having moved beyond my fixation with Vivian's career trajectory. A quick search revealed what I hadn't known. Vivian had departed Meridian 3 weeks ago. No announcement of a new position. The timing of her gift suddenly seemed more significant. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Still at the office?" "It's nearly 8. Just leaving," I replied. "Dinner? Can't tonight? Date with Alex. Tomorrow? It's a plan." I slipped the notebook into my bag and headed out, my mind still turning over Vivian's unexpected gesture. The night was cool and clear, the kind of perfect spring evening that made walking home a pleasure rather than a chore. As I strolled through the bustling downtown streets, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in just a few years. I now led one of the city's most successful agencies. My team respected me. Clients sought my input. Industry publications quoted me. I had achieved everything I had set out to prove I could do when Vivian had dismissed my potential. Yet somehow her note had managed to unsettle me. Why reach out now? What did she want? Or was I overthinking a simple professional courtesy from a former colleague? The following evening, Rachel and I met at our favorite restaurant, a small Italian place tucked away on a side street where the pasta was homemade and the wine list exceptional. As we settled into our usual corner table, I recounted the story of Vivian's gift. "So she just sent you a fancy notebook out of the blue?" Rachel asked, eyebrow raised skeptically. "After 6 months of radio silence?" With a cryptic note congratulating me on stealing their client, I confirmed, sipping my wine. "And she's apparently left Meridian without announcing a new position?" Rachel shook her head. "That's interesting timing." "My thoughts exactly," I agreed. "It feels like there's something I'm missing." Rachel twirled pasta around her fork thoughtfully. "Maybe she's angling for her job back? Now that she's seen the grass isn't greener elsewhere?" I nearly choked on my wine. "That would be unexpected." "Would you hire her back?" Rachel asked, watching my expression carefully. I considered the question seriously. "No," I said finally. "Not because of our history, but because we fundamentally disagree on creative direction. That hasn't changed. Plus," Rachel added with a sly smile, "it would be weird to hire someone who once told you to give up on the job you now have." I laughed despite myself. "There is that. So what are you going to do about her little gift?" "Nothing," I decided. "Maybe send a brief thank you note. But otherwise nothing." The matter seemed settled, and we moved on to other topics. Rachel's new relationship, my upcoming presentation at a major industry conference, the apartment I was considering buying now that my position and salary warranted a more permanent home. But the universe wasn't finished with the Vivian chapter of my story, as I would discover the very next morning. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, beating even Claire to my floor. I liked these quiet moments before the energy and demands of the day took over, time to think strategically rather than just react tactically. I was reviewing proposals for a new healthcare client when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Emma Watson, I answered. Ms. Watson, this is Harriet Jenkins from the American Advertising Federation. I sat up straighter. The AAF was the industry's most prestigious professional organization, and Harriet Jenkins was its executive director. Good morning, Ms. Jenkins. What can I do for you? I'm calling about our annual Innovation in Advertising panel at the national conference next month. We had a speaker drop out due to health issues, and your name came up as a potential replacement. My pulse quickened. The AAF National Conference was the industry event of the year, attended by every major agency and brand. Speaking there, especially on the innovation panel, would cement Reynolds Catalyst's reputation as a forward-thinking leader. I'd be honored, I said, keeping my voice professionally measured despite my excitement. Can you share more details about the panel focus? Of course. This year's theme is Disruption and Adaptation in a Digital-First Marketplace. The panel will discuss how traditional agencies can evolve to meet changing client demands while maintaining their core strengths. I nearly laughed at how perfectly that aligned with my experience merging Reynolds and Catalyst. That sounds right in my wheelhouse. Excellent. There's one more thing you should know. She paused briefly. One of your fellow panelists will be Gregory Moore from Latham & Birch. My momentary elation dampened slightly. Gregory Moore? Any relation to Vivian Moore? Her husband, actually. They've collaborated on several major accounts over the years. Would that be a problem? I hadn't known Vivian was married, much less to someone at Latham & Birch, one of the largest traditional agencies in the country. The personal connection made her gift seem even more curious. Not at all, I assured Harriet, mind racing. I look forward to meeting him. After we finished the call, I sat back in my chair processing this new development. Vivian's husband was an executive at a major agency. She had just left her position at Meridian, and now I was being invited to speak alongside her husband at the industry's most important event. This couldn't be coincidence. I opened my laptop and searched for Gregory Moore. His profile appeared immediately, silver-haired, distinguished, 20 years older than Vivian at least, Chief Strategy Officer at Latham & Birch for the past decade. Well-respected in traditional advertising circles, but not known for digital innovation. Before I could dig deeper, Claire arrived with my morning coffee. "You're early," she observed, setting the cup on my desk. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I replied, closing the browser. "Just been invited to speak at the AAF conference next month." "That's amazing," she exclaimed. "The national one? That's huge, Emma." "It is," I agreed, though my enthusiasm was now tempered with caution. "Can you clear my schedule for those dates? And let Marcus know?" "Of course." "Anything else?" I hesitated, then decided there was no harm in gathering information. "Yes, actually. Can you discreetly find out what you can about Gregory Moore at Latham & Birch? And his wife, Vivian Moore, formerly of Meridian and Reynolds?" Claire's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "I'll see what I can do." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meetings and client calls. It wasn't until after lunch that Claire knocked on my door again, tablet in hand. "I have that information you requested?" she said, closing the door behind her. "That was fast," she smiled. "I have a friend in HR at Latham. We had coffee." She handed me the tablet. "This is interesting reading." The document she'd compiled was impressively thorough. Gregory Moore, 58, had been with Latham & Birch for 15 years, rising to Chief Strategy Officer 5 years ago. Prior to that, he'd worked at several major agencies, including a 7-year stint at Reynolds, which is presumably where he had met Vivian. They had been married for 12 years. More interestingly, industry rumors suggested Gregory was being groomed to take over as CEO when the current chief executive retired next year. But there was also gossip about internal resistance to his promotion, primarily due to his traditional approach in an increasingly digital marketplace. And then there was the note about Vivian's departure from Meridian, not voluntary as I had assumed, but part of a larger restructuring that had eliminated several senior positions. She was currently consulting, which in advertising circles often meant between jobs. "This is very helpful, Claire." "Thank you. There's one more thing," she added. "My friend mentioned that Latham is quietly looking to acquire a digital-forward agency to bolster their innovation credentials before the CEO transition. Apparently, they've approached several smaller shops without success." The pieces suddenly clicked into place with crystal clarity. Vivian's gift. The AAF panel invitation. It wasn't about making peace or acknowledging my success. It was about setting up an acquisition opportunity for her husband's agency. The realization left me feeling oddly deflated. I had moved beyond my history with Vivian, had built something successful on my own terms. Yet here she was again, attempting to use me as a stepping stone, this time for her husband's career advancement rather than her own. "Emma?" Claire was watching me with concern. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," I said, handing back the tablet. "Just connecting some dots." After she left, I leaned back in my chair, considering my options. I could decline the panel invitation, citing a scheduling conflict. I could participate but remain guarded, aware of the potential agenda behind my inclusion. Or I could lean into the opportunity, using it to showcase Reynolds Catalyst's innovation leadership to an influential audience. The last option was clearly the best professional choice, regardless of Vivian's potential involvement behind the scenes. I wouldn't let personal history cloud my judgment again, neither in the form of seeking revenge nor in avoiding opportunities out of wariness. I picked up the phone and called Marcus. "I need to brief you on something," I said when he answered. "It's about a potential acquisition approach from Latham and Birch." "Latham?" He sounded surprised. "They're about as traditional as they come." "Exactly why they might be interested in us," I replied. "How do you feel about having that conversation?" There was a pause before Marcus answered. "Honestly, I'm not opposed to hearing them out. The right offer, the right autonomy guarantees. It could be a good next step for us." His response surprised me. "You'd consider selling again so soon after the Reynolds merger?" "Emma, in this business, everything is always for sale at the right price," he said pragmatically. "That doesn't mean we'd accept any offer, but there's no harm in listening." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Fair enough. I've been invited to speak at the AAF conference next month on a panel with Gregory Moore from Latham. I suspect it's not a coincidence." Marcus said, understanding immediately. "A chance for them to evaluate you before making an approach." "That's my read." "Well then," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Give them a good show." The next few weeks were consumed with preparation, both for my regular executive duties and for the AAF panel. I crafted my talking points carefully, highlighting Reynolds Catalyst's successful integration of traditional account service with digital innovation. I gathered case studies that demonstrated measurable results from our approach. I prepared responses for likely questions, particularly from traditionalists who might be skeptical of newer methodologies. Throughout it all, I kept expecting another contact from Vivian, an email, a call, something to make her agenda explicit. But there was nothing, just the notebook sitting on my desk as a daily reminder of the strange connection that seemed to persist between us, despite my best efforts to move beyond it. The conference was held at a luxury resort outside Phoenix, a sprawling complex of Adobe-style buildings nestled against dramatic mountain backdrops. I arrived the evening before my panel, checking into my room before heading to the welcome reception in the main courtyard. The advertising world is smaller than outsiders might expect, and I recognized many faces as I navigated through the crowd, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. Former colleagues, current clients, industry journalists, I greeted each with practiced ease, networking efficiently while scanning the gathering for one particular face. I didn't have to look long. Gregory Moore was holding court near the central fountain, surrounded by a small group of admiring junior executives. He looked exactly like his photos, tall, distinguished, with expertly tailored clothing and the confident posture of someone accustomed to authority. I observed him from a distance, noting how he commanded attention without obvious effort, a skill I had been consciously developing in myself. I was about to approach when a familiar voice spoke from just behind me. "He's impressive, isn't he?" I turned to find Vivian standing there, looking elegant in a black cocktail dress, her hair styled differently than I remembered, softer somehow, less severely professional. "Vivian," I said, maintaining my composure despite my surprise. "I didn't know you'd be attending." "Supporting my husband," she replied with a small smile. "And curious to see how our panel goes tomorrow?" "Our panel?" I raised an eyebrow. "I was told I'd be replacing someone who dropped out." "You are." She nodded. "Me." The calculated nature of the setup was so transparent I almost laughed. "How convenient, isn't it?" She sipped her champagne, unembarrassed by the admission. "Though in fairness, I did develop a scheduling conflict. We're moving into a new house this week." I studied her for a moment, trying to gauge her angle. "Congratulations on the new home. And on orchestrating this little reunion." She inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. I prefer to think of it as making introductions that could be mutually beneficial. For your husband's agency, you mean? For all parties involved? She corrected. Gregory's been reading about your work. He's impressed. I glanced over at the man in question, who was now looking in our direction with evident interest. And what about you, Vivian? Are you impressed? Or just strategic? Something flickered across her face, an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Would you believe me if I said both? Before I could respond, Gregory excused himself from his group and made his way toward us. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall enough that I had to look up to meet his gaze. You must be Emma Watson, he said, extending his hand. I've been looking forward to meeting you. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, his smile reaching his eyes in a way that seemed genuine. I found myself instinctively liking him, despite my wariness of his connection to Vivian. Likewise, I replied. I've been reviewing the panel format. Should be an interesting discussion. Indeed. He glanced at Vivian with obvious affection. My wife tells me you two have quite a history. I kept my expression neutral. We worked together at Reynolds some years ago. Before Emma became our biggest competition, Vivian added with a smile that almost seemed proud, she's been systematically winning over our client roster at Meridian. Gregory laughed. Hence why Meridian restructured you out, I imagine. Never could handle real competition, that bunch. The casual dismissal of his wife's former employer surprised me, as did the lack of tension between them about it. Their dynamic wasn't what I had expected. Competition keeps us all sharp, I offered diplomatically. It does, Gregory agreed, though sometimes collaboration is even more effective. He glanced around the crowded courtyard. Speaking of which, perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere quieter. Say dinner in about an hour? I'd value the chance to discuss some ideas before tomorrow's panel. The invitation was transparent in its purpose, but I saw no reason to decline. Better to understand their agenda directly than speculate. I'd like that, I said. Though I should warn you, I won't be sharing our panel strategy in advance. He laughed again, a rich sound that carried genuine amusement. Wouldn't dream of asking. Besides, Vivian's already told me you're too smart for such obvious tactics. With arrangements made to meet at the resort's high-end steakhouse, I excused myself to make a quick call to Marcus, updating him on the unexpected developments. His advice was simple: listen more than you speak, reveal nothing we wouldn't share publicly, and remember that everything is negotiable. Dinner proved to be a fascinating study in contrasts. Gregory was warm, engaging, and surprisingly forthright about his interest in Reynolds Catalyst. Cards on the table, he said after we'd ordered. Latham needs to evolve. We've built our reputation on traditional excellence, but the market is changing faster than our internal culture. And you think acquiring an agency like ours is the solution? I asked, cutting directly to the heart of the matter. He smiled appreciatively at my directness. Potentially. We've tried developing digital capabilities in-house, but there's resistance from the old guard. Sometimes it's more effective to bring in established expertise with its own track record. With its own leadership? Vivian added pointedly. I took a sip of wine, considering their approach. You know, we've only recently completed our own merger. The integration is still ongoing, which makes your success all the more impressive, Gregory replied. You've taken two distinct cultures and created something greater than the sum of its parts. That's exactly the kind of leadership Latham needs. The flattery was skilled but obvious. What exactly are you proposing, Gregory? Nothing formal tonight? He demurred. Think of this as a preliminary conversation. But hypothetically, I could envision Reynolds Catalyst maintaining its operational autonomy while becoming the digital innovation division of Latham & Birch. With you continuing to lead that division, of course. And with you as CEO of the parent company, I surmised. He inclined his head slightly. That's the current succession plan, yes. Though the board has made it clear they want to see concrete steps toward modernization before finalizing that decision. Hence your interest in us. Hence my interest in you specifically, he corrected. Reynolds Catalyst has impressive capabilities, but from everything Vivian has told me, you're the driving force behind its transformation. I glanced at Vivian, surprised by the implied endorsement. She met my gaze steadily. I told him the truth, she said simply, that you have vision, determination, and the ability to execute. That you saw the industry's direction before most of us did. The compliment seemed genuine, which made it all the more disorienting coming from a woman who had once told me to give up on my dreams. Why the change of heart? I asked her directly. Gregory looked between us, clearly sensing the undercurrent of unresolved history. I'll give you ladies a moment, he said tactfully, standing. "I see a client I should greet. Back shortly?" When he was out of earshot, Vivian leaned forward. "It's not a change of heart, Emma. It's a recognition of reality. You've proven yourself beyond any doubt. You told me to give up," I reminded her, the words still carrying a sting despite all my success since then. "You dismissed me completely." "I was wrong," she said, echoing the admission she'd made when leaving Reynolds. "More than that, I was threatened. You had ideas I didn't understand, approaches I couldn't control. It was easier to dismiss you than to acknowledge that the industry was changing in ways that might leave me behind." Her candor was unexpected, as was the hint of vulnerability in her tone. "And now?" I pressed. "Now you're facilitating an introduction that could lead to my advancement." "Why?" She smiled faintly. "Self-interest in part. Gregory needs someone like you to secure his CEO position. That benefits me as his wife. At least you're honest about it. But it's also because I've watched what you've built," she continued. "From a distance, yes, but with increasing respect. You took the rejection and used it as fuel. You didn't just prove me wrong, you rendered my entire perspective obsolete." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. I found none. "That couldn't have been easy to admit," I said finally. "It wasn't," she agreed. "But necessary, I think, for both of us." Before I could respond, Gregory returned, and the conversation shifted to safer topics: industry trends, the next day's panel, mutual acquaintances. But Vivian's words lingered in my mind, challenging my long-held narrative about our relationship. Had I been defining myself in opposition to her all this time? Using her dismissal as motivation even after I'd surpassed the goals it had initially driven me toward? The thought was uncomfortable but worth examining. The panel the next day went exceptionally well. Gregory and I had natural chemistry on stage, presenting contrasting viewpoints that nonetheless found common ground in recognizing the need for both innovation and proven fundamentals. The audience response was enthusiastic, with a line forming afterward to continue the conversation. As we fielded questions together, I observed Gregory in his element. Charismatic, knowledgeable, politically astute. I could see why he was being groomed for CEO. I could also see why the Latham board might hesitate without evidence of his ability to lead digital transformation. He understood the concepts intellectually, but lacked the instinctive grasp that came from building campaigns from the ground up in the new paradigm. Later, as the conference was winding down, Gregory invited me to visit Latham's headquarters the following month for more formal discussions. I agreed conditionally, pending consultation with Marcus and our leadership team. As we said our goodbyes, Vivian handed me a business card. "My personal contact information," she explained, "in case you have questions that might be better addressed." Unofficially. The subtext was clear. She was offering insider information on Latham's true position, separate from the official negotiations. It was an intriguing proposition, if ethically questionable. "Thank you," I said, pocketing the card. "It's been illuminating to reconnect." She smiled, more genuinely than I could ever remember from our time at Reynolds. Indeed it has. On the flight home, I found myself repeatedly returning to our interactions, turning them over in my mind like a complex puzzle. Was this elaborate setup? Vivian's gift, the panel invitation, the acquisition overture, simply a calculated business maneuver? Or was there also an element of genuine reconciliation, of acknowledging past wrongs and offering a new beginning? And more importantly, what did I want from this unexpected new chapter? Back at the office, I briefed Marcus and our executive team on Latham's interest. The response was mixed: excitement about the potential resources and client roster of a larger parent company, concern about maintaining our creative independence and culture. "What's your instinct?" Marcus asked me privately after the others had left. I considered the question carefully. Gregory seems sincere about wanting transformation, not just acquisition. And the structure he's suggesting would preserve our autonomy while giving us greater scale. "But," he prompted, hearing the reservation in my voice. "But this all started with Vivian," I admitted. "And I'm still not entirely sure I trust her motivations." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me. "May I speak candidly, Emma? Always. You've built something remarkable here, partly by moving beyond what Vivian once told you wasn't possible. Perhaps the final step in that journey is to evaluate this opportunity purely on its merits, without reference to your history with her." His insight struck home. I had been viewing the Latham opportunity through the lens of my complicated relationship with Vivian, rather than as the significant professional development it represented. "You're right," I acknowledged. The question should be whether this serves Reynolds Catalyst's future, not whether it validates or complicates my past. Exactly. He nodded. And for what it's worth, I think we should explore it seriously. The right partnership could accelerate our growth significantly. Over the following weeks, due diligence proceeded on both sides. Latham sent teams to assess our operations, while we examined their financials and client contracts. The potential synergies were significant, and the structure Gregory had proposed, maintaining Reynolds Catalyst as a distinct division with its own leadership, seemed increasingly viable. Throughout the process, I maintained professional distance from Vivian, though she sent occasional texts with insights about key Latham stakeholders that proved remarkably useful in navigating the complex politics of the larger agency. It was during a particularly intense negotiation session over valuation that I finally used the personal number she'd provided, stepping out of the conference room to call her directly. "The board is pushing back on our revenue projections," I said without preamble when she answered, "suggesting our growth isn't sustainable." "Marshall and Donovan," she replied immediately. "They've been skeptical from the start. Not about your capabilities, but about the overall investment required. How do we address their concerns?" "Focus on client retention rates," she advised. "Latham loses 15% of their major accounts annually. If your number is better, that's your strongest argument for valuation." She was right. Our retention rate was nearly 95%, far exceeding industry standards. When I returned to the negotiation with this comparison highlighted, the tone shifted noticeably. Afterward, I texted her a simple "thank you." Her reply came quickly: "Partners help each other succeed." The word partners gave me pause. Was that how she saw us now? Not adversaries, not even colleagues, but potential partners in this new venture? The thought was strangely appealing, though I remained cautious about fully trusting her. The acquisition negotiations progressed to their final stages. The offer on the table was excellent, a significant premium over market valuation, guaranteed autonomy for the Reynolds Catalyst division, and senior leadership positions for our entire executive team within the Latham and Birch structure. Most notably, I would become Chief Innovation Officer for the combined entity, reporting directly to Gregory as CEO. The night before the final decision, I found myself working late, alone in my office with the city lights spread out below. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily, not just for my own career, but for everyone at Reynolds Catalyst who had trusted my leadership through the previous merger and now faced another transition. My phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected source: "Vivian. Still at the office? Some habits never change." I smiled despite myself and replied, "How did you know?" "Educated guess. Big decision tomorrow. Want company?" The offer surprised me. "You're in town?" "Arrived this afternoon with Gregory. He's at dinner with your board chair." I begged off. "Too many fancy meals lately." I hesitated, then made an impulsive decision. "I could use a break. The rooftop bar at the Archer Hotel is walking distance." 20 minutes, she replied. The Archer's rooftop offered stunning city views and enough ambient noise for private conversation. I arrived first, securing a quiet corner table and ordering a glass of wine to steady my nerves. I wasn't entirely sure why I'd agreed to this meeting, what I hoped to gain from one more conversation with the woman who had once crushed my ambitions and was now instrumental in elevating them. Vivian arrived precisely on time, as always. She spotted me immediately and made her way through the crowded space with the confident grace I remembered. Age had been kind to her, or perhaps it was the absence of the perpetual stress I recalled from our Reynolds days. "This is nice," she said, settling into the chair opposite mine. "I always liked this city at night." "It grows on you," I agreed. "Though I imagine New York has its charms as well." "Different energy?" She nodded. "More frenetic, less grounded." The server arrived, and Vivian ordered the same wine I was drinking. When he departed, an awkward silence fell between us. Two women with too much history for small talk, but too much caution for immediate candor. "Why did you reach out tonight?" I finally asked. She considered the question before answering. "I wanted to make sure you weren't having last-minute doubts about the deal." "Professional interest only?" I raised an eyebrow. "Largely," she admitted, "but not entirely." "What's the other part?" The server returned with her wine, creating a momentary reprieve from the intensity of our exchange. After he left, Vivian took a sip before meeting my gaze directly. "I've been reflecting on our history," she said. "On the role I played in your career trajectory." "You mean telling me to give up on my dreams?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Yes, she nodded, undefensive. That moment, and everything before and after it. You've already acknowledged you were wrong, I reminded her. We don't need to revisit it. I think perhaps we do, she countered gently. Not for closure, we've both moved beyond that need. But for understanding, I sat back, studying her expression. What's to understand? You didn't believe in me. I proved you wrong. Now business circumstances have aligned our interests. It's not complicated, isn't it? She leaned forward slightly. Emma, do you know why I really told you to give up that day? The question caught me off guard, because you didn't think I had what it took. The special something, as you put it. That's what I said, she agreed. But it wasn't the truth. Then what was? She sighed, looking momentarily vulnerable in a way I'd never seen during our time at Reynolds. The truth is that I saw exactly how talented you were, how innovative, how determined, and it terrified me. I frowned, confused. Why would that terrify you? Because I recognized that you represented the future, she said simply, and I wasn't sure I could adapt to that future. It was easier to dismiss you than to acknowledge that the industry was changing in ways that might render my entire approach obsolete. The candor of her admission stunned me. So you tried to discourage me from pursuing advancement? I convinced myself I was being realistic, protecting you from disappointment, she explained. But in reality, I was protecting myself from having to confront my own limitations. I took a long sip of wine, processing her words. That's not what I expected you to say. Is it really so surprising? She asked. Haven't you ever felt threatened by someone younger? Someone who seems to instinctively understand things you've had to work hard to learn? The question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. There was a new strategist on my team, barely 25, whose intuitive grasp of emerging platforms sometimes made me feel hopelessly behind, despite my supposed expertise. I would never discourage someone because of my own insecurities, I insisted. No? Her smile was knowing. Not even subtly? Never found yourself highlighting the challenges rather than the opportunities when they proposed something ambitious? I opened my mouth to deny it, then closed it again, remembering a recent conversation where I'd done exactly that. The parallel was uncomfortable but undeniable. I'm not saying what I did was right, Vivian continued. It wasn't, but it was human. We protect what we know, what's made us successful, until something forces us to change. And what forced you to change? I asked, genuinely curious now. You did, she said simply, watching you succeed despite my discouragement. Seeing the industry embrace approaches I had dismissed, realizing that I could either adapt or become irrelevant. Is that why you left Meridian? To adapt? She laughed softly. I didn't leave Meridian. Meridian left me. Restructuring was the official term, but the reality was that they needed to cut costs and decided experience was less valuable than innovation. The vulnerability in her admission was startling. This was Vivian Moore, always poised, always in control, acknowledging professional rejection. I'm sorry, I said, surprised to find I meant it. That must have been difficult. It was humbling, she agreed, but necessary, I think. It forced me to reevaluate everything. My approach, my assumptions, my future. And that led you to this acquisition strategy for Gregory? Partly, she nodded. I've been consulting with Latham for the past few months, helping them identify potential acquisition targets. But you weren't on the initial list. No, I was surprised. Why not? Because I wasn't sure you'd even consider it given our history, she admitted. It was only after I saw the work you were doing, the way you'd integrated the Reynolds culture without compromising your vision, that I realized you might be exactly what Latham needs. And what Gregory needs for his CEO aspirations? I added. Yes, she acknowledged without apology. But those aren't mutually exclusive objectives. I considered her words, finding an unexpected resonance in her candor. So tonight, this is what? Your final sales pitch? No. She shook her head. This is me acknowledging that our professional lives seem destined to remain intertwined despite my early efforts to limit your trajectory, and suggesting that perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. You're proposing what? A truce? A partnership? I'm proposing that we both recognize we're no longer the people we were 3 years ago, she said carefully. You're not the junior account coordinator seeking validation, and I'm not the creative director threatened by change. We've both evolved. I sat with that thought, testing it against my instincts. Had we evolved? Certainly our professional circumstances had changed dramatically, but had we fundamentally changed as people? Looking at Vivian now, more open, more reflective, more willing to acknowledge vulnerability, I had to concede that perhaps she had, and if I was honest with myself, so had I. Success had given me a confidence that made old wounds less raw, old slights less significant. If the acquisition goes through, I said finally, we'll be working together again in some capacity. Yes, she agreed, though in very different roles than before. And you're comfortable with that? With me leading innovation for the company where your husband will be CEO? More than comfortable, she said. I recommended it. Because I've learned that surrounding yourself with people who challenge your thinking isn't threatening, it's essential. The server approached to ask if we wanted another round. I declined, suddenly aware of how late it had grown and how important the next day would be. As we prepared to leave, Vivian paused. May I ask you something, Emma? Something personal? I nodded cautiously. All these years later, after all your success, does it still matter? What I said to you that day? The question cut straight to the heart of something I'd been avoiding examining too closely. Did it still matter? Had I truly moved beyond using Vivian's dismissal as motivation, as a framing device for my professional narrative? Less than it did, I answered honestly. But yes, it still matters. Not because I need your validation anymore, but because that moment changed my path. For the better, as it turned out. She nodded, accepting this. And if the acquisition proceeds, if we find ourselves colleagues again, then we start fresh. I decided, not forgetting the past, but not defined by it either. I'd like that, she said simply. We parted ways outside the hotel, each returning to prepare for the momentous decisions of the following day. As I walked back to my office to collect my things, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me to this juncture. 3 years ago, Vivian had told me to give up on my dreams. Tomorrow, I would likely accept an offer that would elevate me to an executive position in one of the industry's largest agencies, a position that would place me above her in the corporate hierarchy, yet also align our professional interests in ways neither of us could have anticipated. Life's symmetry could be astonishing sometimes. The final meeting with Latham's acquisition team the next morning was anticlimactic in many ways. The terms had been largely settled, the questions answered, the concerns addressed. What remained was the formal decision by our board to accept the offer, which came with unanimous approval. As handshakes were exchanged and congratulations offered, Gregory made his way to my side. I'm looking forward to working together, he said warmly. Your team has created something remarkable here, and will continue to do so. I replied, just under a larger umbrella now. Exactly the right mindset. He nodded approvingly. Acquisition without assimilation. Your culture is a key asset we're acquiring, not something to be absorbed. His understanding was reassuring. Too many acquisitions failed because the parent company tried to force the acquired entity into its existing mold, destroying the very qualities that had made it valuable in the first place. Across the room, I caught Vivian's eye. She offered a small smile that seemed to hold a mix of emotions: satisfaction at the deal's completion, acknowledgement of our complicated history, perhaps even a genuine happiness for my success. I returned the smile with one of my own, equally complex in its meaning. Later that day, after the Latham team had departed and the initial announcement had been made to our staff, Marcus found me in my office, staring out at the city that had been the backdrop for my entire professional journey. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said, joining me at the window. "Just reflecting on how unpredictable life can be," I replied. 3 years ago, I was told to give up on my dream of becoming creative director. Now I'm about to become chief innovation officer for one of the largest agencies in the country. With the woman who told you to give up now effectively reporting to you, Marcus added with a knowing smile. That's quite a full-circle moment. It is, I agreed. Though strangely, that's not the most satisfying part anymore. He raised an eyebrow questioningly. The most satisfying part is knowing that I built something valuable enough to be worth acquiring, I explained. That our approach, our vision, my vision, has been validated not just creatively, but commercially. And that validation matters more than the personal vindication? He asked. I considered the question seriously. Yes, I decided. Because the validation is about what we created together, while the vindication would just be about an old grudge. Marcus nodded approvingly. That's how I know we're leaving Reynolds Catalyst in the right hands for this next chapter. You've evolved beyond the personal to the truly professional. His words echoed Vivian's from the night before, about how we had both evolved past our former selves. Perhaps that was the true measure of success, not the titles or acquisitions or reporting structures, but the personal growth that accompanied the professional journey. The integration process began immediately and would continue for months. My calendar filled with transition meetings, strategy sessions, and introductions to key Latham personnel. Through it all, I maintained the clear vision that had guided Reynolds Catalyst's success: innovation grounded in measurable results, creativity in service of client objectives. Vivian proved to be an unexpected ally in navigating Latham's complex political landscape. Her insights helped me avoid potential pitfalls and identify important allies within the larger organization. We developed a working relationship that, while not exactly friendship, held a mutual respect that would have seemed impossible 3 years earlier. 6 months after the acquisition, Latham and Birch officially announced Gregory's promotion to CEO, effective at the end of the quarter. The press release specifically cited the successful integration of Reynolds Catalyst and the company's strengthened digital capabilities as key factors in the board's decision. That evening, I received a text from Vivian. "Celebration dinner tomorrow? Gregory would love to thank you properly for your role in making this happen." I replied, "Happy to celebrate. Suggest Giovanni's at 7? Her response came quickly, "Perfect." "And Emma? Thank you for everything." I smiled at the message, understanding all it encompassed. Thanks for my professional contribution to Gregory's advancement, yes, but also perhaps for the grace with which I had handled our complicated history, for finding a way to move forward that honored the past without being constrained by it. As I set down my phone, my eyes fell on the black leather notebook she had sent me nearly a year ago, still sitting on my desk, though now filled with notes and ideas. I ran my fingers over the embossed initials, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me here. Vivian had told me to give up on my dreams. I had refused. And now, in a twist neither of us could have predicted, we found ourselves aligned in a new professional reality, not as adversaries, not as boss and subordinate in either configuration, but as colleagues with complementary strengths working toward shared goals. Life rarely offers such perfect narrative symmetry. When it does, there's wisdom in recognizing it, acknowledging it, and then moving beyond it to write the next chapter. Because that was the truth I had finally come to understand. Becoming Vivian's boss had never been the point. It had never been about her at all. It had been about becoming the professional I knew I could be, about creating something valuable and lasting, about proving to myself rather than to her that my dreams were worth pursuing. And in that pursuit, I had not only achieved those original dreams, but discovered new ones I hadn't even known to imagine. Chief Innovation Officer was just the latest title in a journey that would continue to evolve in ways I couldn't yet envision. The notebook on my desk reminded me of where this particular chapter had begun, but it was also a blank page waiting for what came next. That was the most exciting part, not the vindication of the past, but the potential of the future. Vivian had told me to give up on my dreams. Now I was her boss, and she worked for me, technically at least in the corporate hierarchy. But the reality was both simpler and more complex. We had both found our appropriate places in an industry that valued her experience and my innovation in different but complementary ways. And that was a far more satisfying conclusion than any revenge could have provided.